So what does this mean then for the UK's economic future and the upcoming Brexit talks? Well, I'm joined by Tom Clougherty, editorial director for the Centre for Monetary and Financial Alternatives at the Cato Institute. Welcome to the show. So what's your take on how Prime Minister May's election gamble is playing out?
It certainly appears to be playing out extremely badly. You have to remember, only 2 weeks ago, people were saying a good result for the Conservatives would be a majority of at least 80. Anything less than that, and serious questions were asked about the way Theresa May had run the campaign. Now, if you look at what the Conservatives are saying now, they're obviously spinning the results as they're coming in. They're saying it's OK, we could still scrape a majority. So they're accepting, really, that they'll be at least only where they were to begin with. They may well be worse off. And of course, if the exit poll is right, they lose their majority and have to rely on coalition or minority government. This gamble has not paid off well for Theresa May in the slightest. And as your correspondent has suggested, her very position is going to be in danger tomorrow morning. And
she certainly went into this election with a great amount of confidence, something that we certainly saw also ahead of the Brexit referendum. We saw how that turned out. So given that the country did, though, in the end, vote for Brexit, are you surprised that Theresa May's Conservative Party wasn't able to secure this majority?
Yeah, it's a very strange thing, and I think that people are going to be picking over these election results because, of course, in an electoral system where it's first past the post, where you have different elections essentially in every constituency, the distribution of the voting matters just as much, actually, as the overall numbers. So it could be that the Conservatives are bringing in a lot of Brexit voters who maybe were formerly with UKIP, who maybe formerly were with the Labour Party, but they're gaining those votes in seats where they were either going to win already or seats that they stood no chance of winning. So it's all for nothing in electoral terms.
Now, the President of the European Commission said that the real Brexit talks could only begin once this election had happened. So how does this election, if the results hold, affect the UK's bargaining position with the EU?
It certainly makes things a little bit more difficult. So I think one of the reasons Theresa May wanted this election is because she was worried, well, there were three things, actually, in electoral terms. She was worried that because she didn't have a manifesto commitment to Brexit, the House of Lords, Britain's upper house, could hold the process up if they wanted to. She was worried, second, that with only a small majority in the House of Commons, she could be held to ransom, basically, by her more radical, her more hard Brexit MPs. This is something that kind of happened to John Major when he had a slim majority in the 1990s. Third reason is that it was going to be very awkward to have a general election in 2020, right when you're going to be concluding those Brexit negotiations. So whatever happens, maybe the next general election is pushed back a couple of years. That maybe helps a little bit. But those other two things, it doesn't seem to be like it's going to work out the way she wanted.
Now, let's look at the timing of this election. Obviously, the Prime Minister wanted this to be a Brexit referendum, but unfortunately, in the run-up to the election, we saw the terrorist attacks in London and in Manchester, and we also saw the opposition leaders really pushing this issue of wealth inequality in the country. What were really the key issues, you think, that perhaps shifted this election?
Yeah. I think the terrible thing, and I say this as a policy guy, is that the focus was not really on the issues, not substantive issues of policy. People said this would be a Brexit election, but people haven't really dug into the detail of Brexit during this campaign. Likewise, yes, the leader of the Labour Party has an extremely left-wing economic agenda, the likes of which Britain actually hasn't seen for generations, I think. But that hasn't been much talked about. The Conservatives had a manifesto which I even struggle to recall what the main pledges were, except for their plan on social care, which they U-turned on 2 days later. What the Conservatives tried to do was make this all about personality, all about leadership. The idea, I think, was that Jeremy Corbyn was so thoroughly unelectable. If Theresa May just looked strong, just looked competent, that would deliver a huge majority to the Conservatives. That hasn't worked out. I think the reason why is that Jeremy Corbyn, agree with his views or not, and I disagree strongly with most of them, he comes across as authentic. You know when he says something, he actually believes it.
Right.
And watching him on the campaign, he gave straight answers to straight questions. Whether you agree with those answers or not is beside the point. Theresa May, in almost every interview I saw, and this went for other members of her cabinet, they couldn't answer a question directly about what the policy was, what the implications were going to be. I think because they thought they weren't going to talk about policy. They didn't put out a proper platform.
So being that you do have such differing candidates who are going to have to somehow cobble together a coalition if these exit polls hold, What does that mean then in terms of the UK's economic priorities going forward?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think the one thing we probably can say is that the Conservatives are going to be the biggest party. The exit poll suggests that. The exit poll also suggests that no left-wing or progressive coalition could quite muster enough seats to get a majority of their own. So it would really fall to the Conservatives, I think, to probably rule as a minority government, perhaps with the support of the Ulster Unionists. And so I think that would mean basically a very much reduced platform of things that they could do. They would have to rely basically on just passing budgets, more or less keeping things steady as they go. And to be perfectly honest, that might not be the worst thing in the world, because Brexit is going to be a huge deal. And if they just sort of continue the current economic plans, they don't mess around with it too much, Britain could certainly do much worse.
And speaking of steadying that ship, how is Britain's economy faring at the moment?
Well, it has been faring pretty well. It's been holding up much better than people thought since Brexit. The economy still grew very fast, I think faster than any other European Union country in calendar year 2016. Now, we do have data for the first quarter of 2017, which suggests that Britain has done pretty badly. That being said, it's always dangerous to extrapolate too much from a single quarter of data, not least when it can easily be revised when they look at the figures the next time round. So I wouldn't put too much faith in that, but there are certainly indications that it may not be all plain sailing ahead.
That certainly could be said for a lot of things going on, including this election. Thank you so much for your insights. Tom Clougherty, Editorial Director at the Centre for Monetary and Financial Alternatives at the Cato Institute.